So why would they both be lighting up at the same time if there wasn't some connection? Okay. So there's currently a lot of work going on. Don't worry about all the fancy terminology, right? The main idea is that we've got these co-activated areas of the brain that drive our belief that by moving we're helping cognition, right? We do see increased proteins that are specifically, their job is specifically to maintain function within the nervous system, right? And help to build connections and synapses and things. So we see levels of those proteins go up in the brain when we exercise. So we take a bit of a leap because we want to take the leap, and we say, well, if the proteins are increasing, then why would they increase if they weren't going to be used to build connections in the brain, right? So they're trying to really show that. We see an increase in particular hormones that are involved that are growth factors, and they help with capillary growth in the brain. So if I'm driving more blood flow to the brain and I'm increasing the ability for blood flow in the brain, then again we take a bit of a leap and say, well, then we would be improving cognitive functioning in the brain. All right? So that's what they're working on, trying to get rid of the leap and trying to make definite connections. If you work with children who are ADHD, right, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, then what we see in that population is that somewhere around half of children who are diagnosed with ADHD show motor coordination problems. Right? So their movements are uncoordinated. They might trip over their feet quite a bit. They're not very good at balance tasks. They're not very good at things where they have to like put jigsaw pieces together, right? You also see some motor coordination issues with children who are dyslexic and autistic. So all of these are cognitive problems. So if we see a cognitive delay or disorder and we're also seeing motor issues in those children, then again that seems to support the idea that we have a strong link there. Right? Textbook takes an ecological approach. Right? So when we, way back at the beginning of the semester, we looked at those kind of umbrellas of theoretical approaches to movement. The book comes from an ecological perspective, and in an ecological perspective, we would say that our perception of the environment, we get that information and we can use that information to guide the movement that we do. I don't have to necessarily process the whole thing. So if we back up a little bit, we think about that information processing model. Information processing perspective would say, I get the information, I have to process that information, and then I can initiate a movement in response to that information. From an ecological point of view, they would say not necessarily that I can perceive that information and organize the movement without all that information having to go up to a central command. Right? So I can have a perception action loop that maybe works at the spinal level. We have subgroups under ecological theory. They believe that we can sub-organize groups of muscles or particular sections of limbs around each other based on perception without having a central driver, right? So if I step on an uneven surface, is it really necessary for all that information to go all the way to my brain, to come all the way back down, to reorganize myself? Or can they do it locally? Right? It's a little complicated, so don't get too hung up on that idea. We don't have a lot of evidence to support it, which is why the information processing people like to laugh at the ecological people, because they're like, well, we have actual evidence. And the ecological people are like, yeah, but it doesn't make sense. Right? It's not, we just haven't found a way of testing it, really. Right? So perception action loops maybe guide movement without central command. So, we said infants have all the tools, right? They have ears, they have eyes, they've got cutaneous receptors, they've got the ability, they've got all the mechanics in place to perceive information before they can voluntarily move. Right? So, that perceptual information, if we look at it from the other side, if we say they're connected, initially in an infant, perceptual information is going to guide that movement. So we said way back that it's seeing things and being excited or interested or inquisitive that encourages the child to first start trying to move, right, for themselves. It's that inquisitiveness to go explore something that drives the moving. Then when I'm moving, that changes the information that my brain is getting, and so I learn more about the space that I'm moving in. Right? So it becomes circular once we get going. Okay. I just think, I mean, we keep talking about this idea that we should be building more cognitive work into our PE lesson plans. I really think that's important. Classroom teachers are being encouraged to build physical activity into the classroom. Should you be sitting here stationary while I'm talking at you? Probably not, right? If we believe this idea, then we should restructure the way we run classes so that you guys are moving while you're learning, right? Rather than sitting. I don't have teacher ed training, right? They forget when they employ PhD people to teach in university that we're not teacher education specialists. And so I'm sitting here going, okay, I believe that, but I don't know. I don't have teacher training. So how would I get you guys to move and learn the material that I want you to move? There's got to be a way to do it. I just have to be more creative somehow, and I don't have the background to think about it. So I'm working on it. Any ideas? Much appreciated. If we had stations set up around the room, I don't know, how could we do it so that you would still get the information, but you weren't sitting still? study, very old, the year I was born, so it's very old, right? And it's really fascinating. Even though it's old, it still gives us, it's a great example of trying to put these two ideas, this perception and action coupling, together in a way that's meaningful for us. All right? Because it's one of those things, it's a very abstract concept. How do I see it really happening? All right? So what they did was they put these new kittens into a merry-go-round. And it was like a solid wall with a pattern on it. And one kitten was able to walk around in the circle. And they were harnessed in and drove the merry-go-round. And the other kitten got to sit on its butt in a little go-kart thing and not move. Right? So the one kitten was making the other kitten go round. So if you think about it visually, both kittens were getting the same information. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. So this kitten is seeing, because it's going round and round and round, seeing the exact same thing as this kitten, but it's stationary in that it's sedentary. It isn't doing the moving, right? And what they found was when they took the kittens out, that they both had quite good perceptions, right? They responded to stimuli. If you moved your hand towards them, they moved away. The kitten that didn't move didn't have quite such good depth perception, but obviously it didn't learn to walk, right? So its motor skills were severely hindered, and the other kitten had better depth perception and was able to move. So they found that really interesting, because how does that relate, or does it relate even, to babies? Right? If we carry babies everywhere, or we put them in strollers everywhere, then they see lots of things, but they're sitting still. Right? They're not doing the moving, and so the visual information and the motor information don't couple. So that's what they wanted to look at. Took a while to work out how to look at it. Baby walkers in the early childhood world are a big no-no, actually. They were very popular, and a lot of kids got hurt. Remember what my comment on the playground, right? We take away climbing equipment because kids fall off climbing equipment and get hurt, so climbing equipment is bad. No, there's nothing wrong with the climbing equipment. It's the supervision of the climbing equipment that is the problem, right? Well, the same thing happened with baby walkers. Baby walkers are like big plastic trays with a seat in them and wheels on them, right? So it's got a little material sling. You sit the baby in the sling, its feet can touch the floor, and the tray is on wheels, and so it can waddle around the house. Great idea, because they can self-locomote, except several children fell downstairs and died. Well, the baby walker isn't a babysitter, it's a baby walker. You would have to know where the baby is. It's not the baby walker's fault that the children got hurt. right? So they they've got a very negative connotation if you talk to early childhood people about baby walkers. They tend to get a little bit about them. But actually, they're very beneficial from a motor perspective and a perceptual motor perspective, because the child can self-locomote around the room before it's actually physically able to walk. So it gives the brain this additional information and experience ahead of the child actually being strong enough to walk for itself. What they found when they looked at children that use these baby walkers was that it's the locomotor experience rather than the age of the child when they put them back on that visual cliff or they put them on a slope. The child's reaction to the cliff or the slope is based upon how much motor experience it has, not how old it is. So you can take two children who are 10 months old and one of them is using a baby walker and one of them isn't. The child with the baby walker responds differently to the depth. I have to take that copyright back, my apologies. Okay. So it's the experience that, so in order to be afraid of a height or wary of a slope, right, think about how you respond to a slope. If the slope is like this, and you're standing here, right? What's your response to walking down the slope? If the slope is like this, what's your response to walking down the slope? Right? So, in order to understand the difference, you have to be able to perceive the difference, right? The height, the slope of the floor, okay? So it was a really interesting set of experiments. Dr. Campos is out in California. He runs a early childhood, infant kind of research center. It's really cool. They have some very fascinating material come out of their center. They also looked at the connection between moving and exploring around the barrier. And they found that children with more, remember, if I'm looking at that and I don't understand 3D, then that is a flat wall. Right? There wouldn't be any reason to try to go around it if it's flat. Right? So what they found was that children with more locomotor experience are more prepared to go around because their spatial understanding that there's a behind is better. And then the other one was looking at surfaces and slopes, right? So they obviously didn't do slopes like this, but they looked at what they did. So a child who's only just started to crawl, won't go down the slope. Right? They might turn around and go down backwards, but most of them won't attempt it. And brand new walker does the same thing, because once you stand up, it takes a while for your brain to change. Right? The floor is very close when you're on hands and feet. Once you stand up, you're less stable. The floor's further away. It takes a week or two for the brain to start making the correct decisions on that. So brand new walkers do the same thing. If you put a brand new walker at the top of the slope, they'll sit down and scoot down all night. They won't walk down, even if it's walkable. So they were able to come up with some ways of looking at the idea that these moving and cognition and perception are linked. We just haven't been able to finish it off yet. Where are we? Okay. Affordances. Did we talk about affordances earlier in the semester? Does anybody remember? Perhaps. I thought we did a little bit. An affordance is the opportunity that the environment permits me for movement. Okay. So, if I'm going to go down the gym and I want to squat, but the only equipment down there is really, really heavy, my perception, the affordance that the gym gives me to squat, my perception would be very limited. Right? Someone else, given the exact same environment, so Aaron comes down to the gym or IB comes down to the gym with me, and the affordance they get from the environment is, oh yeah, I can squat that, right? So the environment can be exactly the same, but the affordance that it gives to an individual is going to be different based upon their own perception. To me, this is quite an interesting teaching point, because we often set up skill practices in a way that we think something is doable. Right? So I've said a lot this semester, you've got to set things up so that kids can be successful, or adults. Right? No one likes to fail over and over and over again. So faced with failing, we tend to quit. Okay? So we've got to set up our skill practice, our learning, in a way that allows people to have an element of success to drive motivation to keep practicing. The problem is, we've got to be a little bit cleverer than that, because my perception of how achievable something is different to someone else's perception of how achievable something is. Does that make sense? So if I give you a trampoline, right? I would be so excited if we had trampolines here. I give you a trampoline, I'm going to get up on the trampoline and do a somersault. What are you going to do if I put you on a trampoline? Right? So, the exact same environment affords a different opportunity for movement based upon your perceptions, and your perceptions are based upon your experiences. Right? Your understanding of an environment, your understanding of a skill, of a movement opportunity is based upon your experience. Okay? So, keep that in mind when you're setting up things for your students, your clients, or whatever to be doing, is you might go, oh yeah, they can do this, it'll be okay. And they walk in and go, whoa! Yeah. Right? Because it's a different affordance. It's very, very individual. Stair climbing. Right? Stairs afford the opportunity to climb or not. And what they find is that the affordance for climbing is connected to the height of the step in relation to the length of the leg. So it's not a conscious decision by you. You don't look at the stairs and go, ooh, my legs are too short, right? Your brain makes that calculation for you. And so what you tend to see is if your brain says, those stairs are too deep, then someone will use the handrail and they'll go up maybe one stair at a time. Or they won't use the stairs. Right? They'll find another way. So when you watch young children learn to climb stairs, then what you see is they get, so you grow up in a house that has an upstairs and a downstairs. Right? And when you were a baby, you got to the bottom of the stairs, you're creeping around, buzzing around the ground floor on your hands and knees, and you get to the bottom of the stairs and you're like, right? And at some point they'll start to attempt to climb the stairs, hands and knees, right? Then they might change to hands and feet. Then they might change to holding on to the banister, right? And doing this. It's a long developmental process before your brain goes, oh yeah, I can just walk up the stairs. Part of that is strength, because your brain is taking into account all these different factors. How long are your legs? How strong are your legs? How good is your balance? So the exact same set stairs didn't change in your house while you were growing up, right? You got taller. What do we do as we get older? What do we see happen as leg strength decreases and we see a different pattern on the same set of stairs? So the idea of affordances in an environment often involve body scaling on behalf of the brain, right? What is the person's size relative to the environment? So it's a very useful thing to remember when you're working with different populations. If I'm working with someone, doesn't have to be children, can be adults, right? Some of you are very tall, some of you are less tall. If I give you all the exact same piece of equipment, and that piece of equipment is quite large, the shorter person is less likely to see an opportunity for movement than the taller person. So body scaling changes if you're working with kids who are going into puberty or going through puberty, early teenagers, then their body scaling is changing rapidly during that period of time. If I'm looking at strength, I can still impact strength even if I can't impact height or limb length later on. So I can change the scaling. Right? So, let's go back here. What I'd like you to do, today's Friday, so over the weekend, think about these questions, right, in relation to something you're watching, or if you're working on some lesson plans, or if you are watching kids playing in the park or watching adults playing pickup ball. What are you seeing, and how could you use the idea of body scaling to help you identify things that you're looking at? Right? If walked into a good PE room that was well equipped and had a very educated PE teacher, how would you tell whether the kids in the room were third grade or kindergarten? Right? What should you see? So just be thinking about those ideas. The more you use the idea, the easier it is to come to grips with it. Right? It seems obvious that if you had a small child, you would give them a smaller racket. And yet, right, the hockey sticks on the playground do not come in a variety of sizes. The only way I can change up the sizes on those sticks is to cut them down myself. Right? And this idea has been around for how long? 30, 40 years, and yet equipment manufacturers make equipment that is all the same size. Even though it's supposed to be developmentally appropriate because it has a big squishy soft head that you would not give a teenager. Right? So think about these ideas. It seems obvious, and yet it's not what happens when you're out in the real world. So in your gym, in your world, what are you going to do to take this into account and make your class more appropriate? What could you do? Right? Sometimes you have to get really creative. Okay. All right? Okay, we'll see you on Monday. Oh, I forgot to bring put them on that front table and I'll go and get the crate. Thank you.
Did you want them in our binders or can we just turn them in and paper?
I would prefer it in the binder if you have one.
I have it, but it's not with me. It's at my house.
So put it in and then bring the binder on Monday or something.
Okay.
I'm probably not going to get to them
Okay.
with everything. How do I... Well, he said just press the button.